Hi folks, today we're talking about a problem all too common in California, the so-called housing crisis. The media says it's caused by greedy landlords, evil capitalism, and a lack of compassion, but you spend 5 minutes on Zillow and you'll see plenty of listings. Just nothing you can afford unless you moonlight as a cartel accountant, or maybe you're an illegal immigrant, in which case LA Mayor Karen Bass will personally hand you the keys to your brand new taxpayer-funded house and the kitchen sink. We're told inflation is cooling and prices are stabilizing around the country, and maybe that's true. But here in California, many are one flat tire away from total financial collapse. Gas is still flirting with $5 a gallon, eggs are basically jewelry at this point, and rent has actively replaced the mortgage as your biggest life sentence. Meanwhile, states like Florida and Texas are chilling with low prices, working, air conditioning, and grocery bills that don't require a GoFundMe. So what's the difference between states that are thriving and the one Democrats brag about being the fourth largest economy in the world? The answer is simple, folks. It's not actually a housing crisis. It's a Democrat policy crisis served with a side of avocado hypocrisy and a 3-month wait for permit approval. Now, for the uninitiated in California politics, Democrats have held one-party authoritarian rule in this state for nearly 60 years, with the last 20 marked by supermajorities in the state legislatures, meaning near total unopposed control from the Capitol to the governor's mansion, which they've held since Schwarzenegger left office back in 2011. So let's be clear, the housing crisis they love to whine about is a crisis Democrats created. This isn't some tragic accident or unforeseen market failure. California's affordability collapse is the predictable end result of decades of failed Democrat policy built on illusion and control. They love to blame greedy landlords and evil corporations, but they're the ones who created a labyrinth of zoning laws, CEQA red tape, and rent control policies that make it nearly impossible to build anything new in this state. Meanwhile, they give friendly contracts to for-profit developers and shovel billions, literal billions, into crony nonprofits that burn through funds on administrative costs and PowerPoint decks, apparently. Never results for the actual working people in the state. They protect the worst landlords and punish honest ones, and then act surprised when the working class gets priced out of cities they've called homes their entire lives. This isn't compassion, folks. It's cartel economics dressed up in social justice drag. Democrats didn't just abandon the laws of supply and demand. They basically outlawed them and replaced them with a rigged system where only the politically connected can survive. This is where Democrat governance ultimately leads, not to equity, but to entropy. And California is a canary in the coal mine. Now, to truly understand California's so-called housing crisis, you have to start with the biggest money pit of them all, the homeless crisis, or more accurately, the multi-billion-dollar bureaucracy that feeds off it. You've probably heard that California has around 181,000 homeless people living in the state. What you probably haven't heard is that this one state, just one, now accounts for nearly 40% of the entire nation's homeless population, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2023 Annual Homeless Assessment Report. Los Angeles alone has over 75,000 homeless residents based on the 2023 Greater Los Angeles homeless count by the LA Homeless Services Authority. And that number isn't going down anytime soon, even though the mayor and one of our local organizations, LASA, have been, kind of fudging the numbers lately. It's actually been rising year to year. And yet California spends more than any other state by far trying to fix this specific issue. Literal billions have been poured into programs like Project Homekey and Homekey, so much that the state could have practically bought a small country at this point. And what did we get for all of that spending? Shuttered hotels, unsafe and infested shelters, open-air drug markets throughout the state, all funded by taxpayer dollars. And of course, juicy scandals involving organizations like Shangri-La Industries that expose just how fast public money disappears when there's no oversight and no accountability, according to LAist reporting and audits from the California State Controller's Office in 2023. But here's the real kicker, folks. A lot of these contracts, the ones meant to solve homelessness, aren't going to public agencies or charitable nonprofits. They're going to for-profit developers who get to build subsidized housing on the taxpayer's dime, lock in a few years of affordable rent with a convenient covenant that expires, and then flip those properties back to market rate as soon as that timeline hits its predictable end. According to a 2022 report from the California Legislative Analyst's Office, many of these affordability covenants last just 15 to 30 years max, after which units can legally revert to full market pricing. It's a bait and switch scam wrapped in virtue signaling language and rubber stamped by politicians who take campaign donations from the very firms they're handing contracts to. It's not just a grift, folks. It's legally mandated grifting. Now, the most outrageous example of this grift is currently unfolding in the Pacific Palisades, a community that was devastated by wildfires earlier this year. Fires made worse by the negligence and mismanagement of both Mayor Karen Bass and Governor Gavin Newsom. See, just last week, it was reported that the state approved over $100 million in public funds to build so-called affordable housing over at the Pacific Palisades. This is part of Newsom's Homekey expansion. According to the California Department of Housing and Community Development, the funding was pushed through despite widespread community opposition and major concerns over the site location and the predictably outrageous cost per unit. This all sounds noble on paper, right? All this policy, until you realize it's just really a strategic land grab. See, while families who lost their homes in the Woolsey and Palisades fires are still stuck in permit purgatory, buried under layers of environmental red tape, the state has been clearing every hurdle at breakneck speed for politically connected developers. And not to help rebuild what was lost, but to construct new affordable housing projects with covenants that quietly expire, letting the units flip back to market rate down the line. So for anybody out there having a hard time following along with this nightmare of corruption, the state is basically saying that if you're a fire victim trying to restore your home, well, good luck to you. You'll need to wade through multiple CEQA reviews, wildlife impact reports, and a maze of bureaucratic delays. And the track record isn't good, folks, because according to a 2022 investigation by the LA Times, even years after the Woolsey fire, many homeowners were still waiting to rebuild due to CEQA regulations and permitting gridlock. That same bureaucratic chokehold is now being replicated in the Palisades, unless, of course, you're a developer with political connections. As we've seen, that's how you get stuff done in this state, folks. You got to grease Greasy Gavin's hands. And this is the reality no one is talking about when they talk about the housing and affordability crisis. California isn't just expensive, it's economically irrational. You can't afford to buy because housing prices are inflated by artificial scarcity created through zoning laws and CEQA regulations, according to the California Association of Realtors and the Hoover Institution. You can't afford to rent because rent control policies have destroyed incentives to maintain or expand rental stock, a trend backed by Berkeley's Haas Institute for a Fair and Inclusive Society. You can't rebuild because the permitting process is so draconian, so deeply entangled in bureaucratic nonsense that entire neighborhoods stay empty for years after natural disasters, as documented in post-fire recovery reports from CAL FIRE and the California Department of Insurance. And if you're an honest landlord, forget about it. You're stuck with tenants you can't evict, properties you can't repair affordably, and a tax code designed to punish ownership, all reinforced by the Tenant Protection Act of 2019 in Assembly Bill 1482, and various local eviction moratoriums still in effect in cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco, which somehow punish honest landlords but reward the shady ones, as we'll see in a moment. All that being said, California has effectively created the perfect storm: unaffordable homes, unbuildable land, and ungovernable systems. This isn't mismanagement, by the way. It's just straight up policy. And those policies are designed not to solve homelessness, not to help increase the housing supply in the state, not to protect tenants, not to protect landlords, but rather to preserve a permanent crisis that justifies endless government expansion and an entire system of grifters feeding at the public trough. A phenomenon documented in audits from the California State's Auditor's Office and investigative reports from CalMatters. This is what happens when you replace accountability with ideology, when you trade supply and demand economics for activist slogans and pork barrel contracts. The result is a state where even the dream of housing has become a luxury item. Not because we ran out of space, not because we ran out of homes, but because we ran out of honest governance and replaced it with Marxist grievance. And the pain Californians are feeling is being expressed in the most visible way possible. People are leaving the state in droves. Over 400,000 residents have fled California in just the last 2 years. These are teachers, nurses, cops, parents, small business owners, regular people who once believed in the California dream, but have now realized that dream has been hijacked by a political class of Democrats more interested in social experiments and actual governance. See, when you're making six figures and still living like a broke college student with anxiety, roommates, and no hope of owning a home, you start to question what exactly you're paying for by living in this state. California has somehow managed to create a cost of living crisis so bad that $120,000 a year feels like poverty. And it's not just individuals who are packing up. Since 2018, over 300 corporate headquarters have completely left the state, according to business migration trackers. Companies that once proudly bore the California-based label, tech firms, logistics operations, manufacturers, are now incorporating Texas, Florida, Tennessee, Arizona, Nevada, or anywhere that doesn't punish them for actually hiring people, renting space, or turning a profit. This is what happens when ideological governance replaces practical governance. When you treat business owners like villains, tax productivity like a sin, and weaponize regulation against your own economic base, eventually the base moves. And it's not just businesses and jobs, it's generational wealth, community leadership, cultural memory, and civic stability walking out the door. This is a direct result of the Mamdani model, the Democrat socialist model of tax the rich. It sounds good on paper, but what ends up happening is those folks leave the state to friendlier states where they're not going to be gutted, where they can actually run their business without being taxed to death. Because guess what? In an economy where you don't have private enterprise to create the jobs, then you need a government to step in to provide those jobs that now don't exist. And that, folks, is how you get communism. Anyway, all that being said, how do we get here? Well, we got here because California's Democrat class bought into the fantasy that they could extract infinite resources from their own population without ever being held accountable. They believed that if they just kept promising utopia like free housing, green energy, reparations, equity, they could keep voters pacified while running the state like a high-stakes NGO. But utopia doesn't pay the utility bill, folks. And now the consequences are very real. See, schools are emptying, tax revenue is shrinking, infrastructure is decaying, and the only people who can afford to stay here are either ultra-wealthy Democrats who can wall themselves off from the chaos, all the smash and grabs happening all around town for the last few months, or the poor independent whose survival is now tethered to government largesse. Now, all that being said, this exodus isn't just a logistical crisis, it's a moral referendum. It's the loudest possible rejection of the policies California Democrats insist in labeling as compassionate and progressive. What we're witnessing is a quiet revolution by subtraction, a slow, steady revolt of the people who once made this state run, now making a run for the exit before there's total collapse. And if you want a preview of where the rest of the country is headed, just follow the moving vans, because this isn't just about California. It's about what happens when ideology collides with actual reality. And reality, folks, well, as we've seen in the last few years, it always wins. Now, let's be clear. This isn't just about politics. It's also about affordability. See, in Los Angeles, rent has increased by over 30% since 2020, according to data from Zillow and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The average rental price for a one-bedroom in Los Angeles now exceeds $2,500, and across California, the statewide median rent is hovering around $2,800 per month, according to the California Association of Realtors. That doesn't include utilities, parking, or the increasingly common pet rent fee that many landlords are now tacking on. Meanwhile, the average working class Angelino is spending over 50% of their income on housing alone, based on figures from the U.S. Census Bureau and the California budget and policy center. The rest of their income, well, swallowed up by rising grocery prices, record high gas costs, and the mental toll of sitting in some of the worst traffic congestion in the nation, as reported by INRIX's 2023 Global Traffic Scorecard. Now, to take this a step further, California Democrats love to market themselves as tenant first. They're progressive, they're protective, and compassionate of tenants. But the truth is, that image is largely just political performance. Behind the curtain, the system is broken, selective, and often hostile to the very renters it claims to protect. Real abuses by slumlords, illegal lockouts, neglected repairs, rent gouging often go unchecked. Meanwhile, honest renters get buried in a maze of red tape and vague policies that shift constantly, while the state demands strict compliance from tenants and offers none from itself or its politically connected partners. Now, take the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, also known as AB 1482. It imposed a statewide rent cap of 5% plus inflation per year and limited evictions to just cause scenarios. Sounds good on paper, right? But in practice, it led to many landlords to preemptively raise rents or sell off properties altogether, especially mom and pop landlords who didn't have legal teams or lobbyists. According to analysis from the California Legislative Analyst's Office, the policy has reduced housing churn, but also discouraged new rental investment in tight markets like Los Angeles and San Francisco. Then came the COVID-era eviction moratoriums, first under Executive Order N-2820 signed by Newsom, later codified by AB 3088, then SB 91 and AB 832. These laws halted evictions for non-payment of rent due to COVID-19 hardships, but implementation was chaotic across the state. According to the California State Auditor's 2022 report, many local housing departments failed to process emergency rental assistance in a timely manner, with delays stretching for months on end. Tenants were told they were protected, but many still faced illegal lockouts or quietly lost their homes because the state failed to follow through on its promises. In Los Angeles, for example, the city maintained its own extended moratorium until February 2023, causing severe strain on small landlords, many of whom had gone years without payment and no legal path to recover. And what about the complaint process? Well, the Los Angeles Housing Department, LAHD, is supposed to oversee rental compliance, repairs, and tenant harassment cases. But according to a 2023 review by the City Controller's Office, LAHD was backlogged on thousands of cases with average resolution times ranging from 60 to 180 days. If you're a tenant dealing with mold, leaks, or retaliatory rent hikes, or any other form of retaliation, you're more likely to get help by going viral on TikTok than through official channels in the county. That's not governance. That's just straight up collapse, right? Now, while all of this unfolds, politically connected nonprofits are handed millions to operate tenant assistance programs, often with little oversight. The Eviction Defense Collaborative in San Francisco and Stay Housed LA in Los Angeles received tens of millions in city and state contracts, but according to reporting from Cal Matters and the LA Times, many of these groups lack transparency on outcomes, and tenants frequently complain about poor service, unanswered calls, or legal advice that comes after they've already been evicted. And let's not even forget CEQA, okay? The California Environmental Quality Act. We've mentioned this a few times already in this video. What is CEQA? Well, they're basically environmental laws that get weaponized by NIMBYs and unions to block or delay housing developments, even those specifically intended for low-income renters. According to Stanford's Land Use and Housing Project, CEQA lawsuits have delayed or killed over 50,000 proposed housing units across the state in the last decade. So while the state claims to champion renters, it's also creating the very supply constraints that drive rental costs up around the state and making it effectively unlivable for anybody who's earning less than six figures. Now, it goes without saying, this isn't protection. It's straight up paralysis. And it's by design. When the state creates unworkable policies like AB 1482 or poorly administered rent relief programs, it gets to posture as pro-tenant while outsourcing the fallout to landlords and tenants to battle it all out in court. And when departments like LEHD fail to enforce even the most basic regulations, the entire framework collapses into chaos. The result, well, fewer available units, higher prices, longer wait lists, and a dysfunctional complaint system that only responds when shamed publicly. All in all, California's so-called tenant protections reveal a deeper cultural rot. The Democrat political class doesn't want to solve the housing crisis. It wants to manage it indefinitely, because that's how it expands its power. That's how it convinces people to buy into affordable housing. That's why they trade in crisis and not resolution, because as long as the system stays broken, there's always another grant to award, another program to launch, and another press conference to hold, announcing the next affordable housing building that they're making with their cronies. Meanwhile, the people they claim to protect are getting squeezed from both ends by the market and the state. So it's never been more evident that if Californians want real tenant protection, it starts with competence, transparency, and accountability, not with slogans, lawsuits, and backlogged complaint lines. Until then, what California offers isn't justice. It's a rigged game that appears to help tenants while they actually lose slowly, and the bureaucrats win forever. And let me be clear, folks, this isn't theory. This isn't some abstract policy debate or a hypothetical about what might happen under the housing system Democrats have built in California. This is very real. In fact, it's happening to me, and it's also happening to working class Californians across the state. Yes, renters who pay on time, take care of their homes, and try to handle problems the right way. In return, they get steamrolled by a rigged system that pretends to protect tenants while quietly shielding the people who profit from the chaos. That being said, like a lot of people in California nowadays, I recently hit a rough patch. An uninsured driver crashed into my car. I got hit with unexpected tax bills, and business typically drops off 25% in July because of the holidays. It all added up really fast. So on July 16th, I reached out to my landlord to explain that I was facing a temporary financial setback and to request a short deferment. I offered documentation and tried to work out a reasonable, good faith plan. When I didn't hear back after over a week, I was told he hadn't seen the message and was advised to follow up by email. I sent a detailed email on July 29th, still no response. Only after chasing down the property manager did I get any acknowledgement at all. Apparently, ignoring a tenant trying to resolve things in good faith is just standard practice for my landlord, CPM LA. Anyway, when I finally got in touch with my landlord, we worked out a deal. I'd pay July's rent in full, prorate August for the few days I'd remain in the unit, and split the 2-month lease break penalty. 1 month covered by my security deposit, the other paid in 6 monthly installments. I followed up with a detailed written summary to confirm everything and heard no objections at first. A day later, everything changed. My landlord then started claiming the terms were misunderstood and completely shifted his position, saying he would now withhold my deposit for vague, unspecified damages to the unit. It got even shadier when I offered to schedule a move-out inspection of the unit, and he flat out refused to visit the apartment before I left, saying he didn't have time to come by. No inspection, no itemized list, no transparency, just a surprise bill that I'm supposed to expect, and another retaliatory eviction threat. Anyway, when I followed up again requesting clarity, he told me he was already being more than nice and issued another eviction threat. And here's the kicker, folks. He admitted the final bill would be anywhere between $2,500 and $10,000 with zero explanation of how that figure would be determined. No process, no accountability, just deceptive, one-sided maneuvering where the tenant is left completely exposed. This isn't a misunderstanding, folks. It's just dirty business wrapped in legal ambiguity and enabled by a system that lets landlords make up the rules as they go along. Now, for context, under California Civil Code 1950.5, tenants have the right to request a pre-move-out inspection, and landlords are required to itemize any deductions from the deposit within 21 days of vacating. Under Code 827, any material change to financial terms must be disclosed in writing and agreed upon. And under Code 1940.2, landlords are explicitly prohibited from retaliation, including eviction threats tied to tenant asserting their rights. I cited all of this in an email and phone conversations with my landlord, clearly professionally and in good faith. My landlord's response? Well, just more stonewalling, more dodging, phone calls ignored, moving the goalposts. At one point, I was literally told by him, "I'm not working with you anymore," while I was still legally occupying the unit and preparing to leave on time as agreed upon. And that's the thing, folks. My situation isn't some outlier. What's happened to me is just the everyman version of a statewide scam. On paper, these policies look protective. In practice, the system is built to worn you down as a renter. You don't get enforcement. You don't get mediation. You don't get fairness. What you do get is a warning. Don't make noise. Don't you dare push back. And definitely don't ask for clarity about what your landlord plans to charge you after you move out. Because see, in California, apparently, asking your landlord to follow the law is now considered unacceptable. This is the end result of when politics replaces governance, folks. When the housing crisis becomes a permanent excuse for half-baked legislation, selective enforcement, and zero accountability. The state loves to roll out tenant protections when it helps them politically. But when those same protections are needed in the real world, all of a sudden they vanish. If you're not filming it, if you're not hashtagging it, if you're not keeping meticulous record of everything your landlord is doing, if you're not threatening to sue, you're basically invisible. And even then, you're still probably screwed. And it goes without saying that this isn't just about a single bad actor with CPMLA. It's about a culture, one where plausible deniability is baked into every phone call, every email, every deadline, where landlords like CPMLA can string you along for weeks, change the terms without notice, be completely negligent to their own admission, and then weaponize the legal system to scare you into silence. And unless you've studied the law, documented everything, and are prepared to fight back publicly, well, you're on your own. It is actually unbelievable that I got threatened with eviction twice because I had the audacity to ask my landlord for a shred of transparency because I want to know if I'm going to be liable for $10,000. I want to prepare myself. Imagine that, folks. Imagine in America in 2025, unironically being punished for requesting transparency, for citing the law, for expecting a basic level of fairness. That, folks, is apparently too much to ask in this state. So no, this isn't theory. It's not a case study. It's the daily reality for tenants in a state that sells protection but delivers complete abandonment, where the slogan is justice, but the product is absolute dysfunction. And until we stop pretending this is just about housing and start calling it for what it is, systemic abuse backed by policy and politics, nothing is going to change. Because if people with resources and business owners like myself are going through situations like this, I can only imagine what hourly workers, what working families that are living paycheck to paycheck with multiple children to feed are going through in this state. It doesn't look pretty, folks. And this is all a result of Democrat dysfunction. All that being said, folks, if you've lived through this fraud, right now is the time to speak up. If you fled the state, don't stay silent. California's housing crisis isn't just a policy failure, it's a racket. A shell game where billions are siphoned off through NGOs, sweetheart developer deals, and performative tenant protections that do more harm than good. While Democrats throw taxpayer money at crumbling motel conversions and call it compassion, working class Californians are drowning in rent hikes, red tape, and retaliation. This isn't a housing policy. It's a wealth transfer scheme funneling money from the middle and working class to a cartel of politically connected elites. And the worst part, they wrap it in language of equity and social justice to keep you from questioning all of it. And look, folks, the fix isn't complicated. We need real Republican leadership that actually understands how housing markets work. Here's what we can do, for example. Repeal CEQA abuse and dismantle the zoning stranglehold that's choking new housing. Get the government out of the home building business. We're not a communist country. Get the government out completely, okay? Taxpayer dollars shouldn't be used to subsidize for-profit developers or fund overpriced government-built units that quietly convert to market rate after a few years. Instead, let's empower small developers and local entrepreneurs to fill that gap. Let private enterprise do what it does best. Let the market breathe, instead of letting bloated state agencies and corporate donors rig it for their own benefit. That said, let's take it a step further. Let's end disappearing affordability covenants that allow developers to game the system. Our government should be fast-tracking permits for working people trying to build or renovate their property, not stonewalling them into oblivion in these land grab schemes. Okay, let's offer tax incentives for small landlords who keep rent stable. And please, let's help first-time homebuyers with zero interest down payment loans. My generation desperately wants to buy a home, and we've been priced out of the system in perpetuity. For renters and tenants, we need more transparency on both sides and a total ban on junk fees like pet rent, whatever that's supposed to be. And most of all, we need to audit and defund failed Democrat programs like Homekey until real oversight is in place. California doesn't need another task force. It needs a political exorcism, folks. Vote like your rent depends on it, because guess what? It does. You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.